Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to start with the two main ones. Well, I guess there's three main ones, the BRBC, the RLA, and the RPA. We also have had some revisions to the two modification forms for the RPA and the listing agreement, and to our counteroffers, and the SPQ and TDS, which, in full disclosure, I realized today I hadn't seen those yet. So we'll be looking at those two together. So let's start with the BRBC, since that's the first step in our process with our buyers. So let me pull this up and make it a little bit bigger, and then I will share my screen. Okay, there's not been, the changes on this form are not huge, but nonetheless, we need to be aware of what they are. Okay, can everybody see that okay? So this has been revised as of December, and basically now it is it's defaults to for a single family residence. And if it's not a single family residence that you're looking for with your buyer, then you can check this box to exclude that. You can also still check anything else. I don't know why I would check a box to exclude it, as they could change their mind along the way. So I probably wouldn't do that. There is a box here now to see attached broker created compensation schedule. So you can create your own compensation schedule. Although most common is going to be that we're going to put a percentage in here. And Bob, I'm going to explain this how I normally do, and I want you to tell me if it's okay.
I'll listen in. I'll correct you if I feel that you
Okay.
need to be corrected.
So because we're not allowed to tell you what to put here for a percentage, because that is negotiable, what I will say is that all market centers have a minimum amount that you must charge, and that they have the right to say that because there's a cost of doing business and the bills have to be paid, etc., right? And in most market centers, that minimum is 2%. Now, that being said, if something is a minimum that you have to have without broker's consent, it's probably not enough. Okay, and I'll leave it at that. Is that safe to say, Bob? Are we good with that?
Yeah, the only thing we need to be a little bit cautious with, even though we're separate market centers, uh, for everybody that's on this call, this is not from one person or from one market center telling the other market centers that this is what your minimum is. Talk to your broker, find out what the minimum is. And of course, if there's a challenge of any kind, or if you've got a very difficult client, then talk to your broker. There may be a way of getting around it and making it work for you. But again, the whole reason we're even having this conversation today is because of the appearance that we're colluding with each other. So
Right.
definitely talk with your broker, find out exactly what their minimums are.
And I appreciate you adding that. I know most of the ones that I'm involved with, that is the minimum. So that's why I say that. But it is true. Always check with your broker. You never know, things can change. And just so everybody knows, we have Bob Ridgway with us today, and he is one of the brokers in the West Ventura County Market Center. So that's why I was making sure that that was good. So thank you for that, because that's how I've been explaining it. Okay. The other thing that has changed on the BRBC, you'll notice here for cancellation purposes, if it's an exclusive, it used to be effective 30 days after receipt. Now the box can be checked and you can change that date to make it anywhere from immediately to not to exceed 30 days. Then the other difference that we have here is, you notice there used to be two different things here. Now there's only one for financial concern. Buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay the broker. So it used to have two different things that we could check here. Now it's just the one. And so that's a conversation that you'd want to have with your buyer. And then, of course, you can still represent them as long as they understand that you can't work for free. So you would have to negotiate, and they would have to be willing to negotiate your compensation with the seller. Okay, and the things that are down here in red are just more explanation of what is in the grid in red. So really, that's the main thing that has changed for the BRBC. Not that much. Any questions about this? All right. Let me go ahead and let's go to the next one. We're going to go to, oops, let me get rid of this. We're going to go to the RPA. See a couple of things on here. I will say the changes that are on the RPA and the RLA, I'm very happy about. I think they're good changes. And again, they're nothing crazy, but they are definitely good changes. Okay, so you can see at the top here, not much has changed. Something we don't use that often, increased deposit. Now you can do an attached form if there is one rather than putting the amount. So that has changed if anybody does increase deposits. Then the big changes come down here on the second page of our grid. So additional seller credit terms. This does not include buyer broker compensation. So this would be up here at the top. It's automatically credit to buyer from the seller for closing costs. Now, if there's any other credits to the buyer, that's what you would write in below here. Okay. The other thing that has changed is the SPBB is no longer needed. And by checking this box right here, actually, it still, I'm noticing, populates an SPBB. But it's all taken care of in this section. Okay. So you're going to put your amount of compensation here, right? So whether it's a percentage or a flat fee, or you're changing the amount here toward the obligation about the buyer to compensate buyer's broker. So again, what I said with the BRBC according to percentages applies here. We can't tell you what to put. Your broker has a minimum. If it's a minimum, it's probably not enough. Okay, but that is negotiated between you and your buyer. So that's the big difference, is that it's all in this instead of having to populate a whole nother form. Okay. Now
Jody,
this, yes,
on that, okay, so now when you submit the RPA, are we still sending the BRBC along with it and then it has to match, right?
yes, you should, yes. You don't have to submit the BRBC with your offer, but you do have, it's a good idea to submit at least.
Yeah, because they can request it, right?
Right, but you have to have it ready. And a side note, this should go without saying, and yet I've had it come up, so it's worth noting. Make sure if you're submitting an offer that you have the BRBC signed prior,
Mhm.
dated and time stamped prior to your offer. Now, the reason I say that, most of us know we have to have a BRBC if we're going to show property, or a
Mhm.
PSRA, of course. Um, we have had circumstances come up recently where a buyer did not view a property. They wanted to write an offer on a property. It still has to have a BRBC signed prior, okay? Because you're giving any information on that property for the purpose of writing an offer. So that has to be done prior to that conversation. Yes, Bob.
Yeah, Jody, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think to answer his question in regards to the BRBC, I do believe if it's requested from the selling side, that it's just, I do believe it's just what page 3 of it, I think, is all that you really have to turn over that breaks down what the payment is. It's one of the pages, and I don't remember,
Yeah,
but
I believe it's page
there is
5.
specific verbiage in there, isn't there?
Yes, I'm pulling it up. It's off screen, but it's page. Nope.
Maybe it's page 1.
Well, it was page 5. Oh, on the new one, it's got to be page 1.
Yeah,
Um,
conversations on
on the
when.
new one, because the new one here, let me hang on. Let's share the screen for this so we can all see this. Um, I'm glad this came up because this actually is a change I didn't notice. It's page 1 because page 1 has your compensation on here, right here. And it used to be, let me get to page 5. It used to be that the amount was on here a second time if it was exclusive. And unless I'm just missing something, I'm not seeing that. So we used to send page 5 because it had the amount and the exclusive initials. And now you're going to have to send page 1. That's the only place with the amount. Good. See, they can't put in red what they take away. And so that's a good question there. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, let's go back to our RPA. Here we go. Okay. Tenant occupied properties, 7A, TOPA is not attached. So this is if you're not attaching it, although that doesn't make sense to me. Maybe it does to Bob. To me, if this is checked, you should have the form attached that says it is attached. This would mean you didn't check this box. But if you have a tenant occupied property, it's good practice to check this box and use that form. So not sure why they would give us the option not to. I'm going to recommend that you do check that and use that form. Okay. I think, as I mentioned, there wasn't a lot changed on this. Point of sale requirements, they did add some verbiage in here. So point of sale inspection reports and repairs refer to such actions required to be completed before or after close of escrow that are required in order to close under any law and paid by the property specified. And such repair shall be completed prior to final verification of property. Then this is the verbiage they added. Unless otherwise agreed, defensible space compliance shall be determined as agreed in C.A.R form FHDS. Okay, so that's the fire hazard defensible space addendum disclosure. Okay, so that's all they added, unless otherwise agreed. So essentially, it remains the same. And just for purposes of anyone new who may not know what point of sale requirements are, this is something that the city or county will require is done prior to a property changing hands. So sometimes a code or something may be in place, such as water saving devices. When they enacted that, it didn't mean everybody had to go out and get low flow toilets. But what it did mean is if you lived in the home and you had changed out your toilet, it had to then be a low flow. And some, not all, areas require that be done before transfer of sale. So you need to check with your local city, your local county to see what your point of sale requirements are, if any. For instance, where I live, there aren't any. But in the next city over, there is one, and it's a big one. And so you have to make sure that you know who's paying for that, because that one's like a $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 fee. The city has areas that were unincorporated, that were not on city sewer, that are now incorporated. So no one that could live there prior was expected to attach to sewer. They didn't have to. But if they sell the house to a new person, before the sale can happen, they have to be attached to city sewer. That's a few $1,000s. So it's super important that we know who's paying for that in the contract when it's negotiated. So please make sure you're checking with your local areas to know what your point of sale requirements are, because some of you have them and some of you don't. And even within your own market center, you'll have some cities that have them and some that don't. Okay. So please make sure you're aware of those things. If you're writing up a purchase agreement and you're unaware and it happens to be a time where you can't find out, maybe your city or county is closed, you can't get a hold of anybody, my recommendation is mark, depending on how you're doing it, mark for the seller to pay for it, unless your buyer wants to strengthen their offer, and then put if applicable on the line next to it. Okay. All right. I think,
Jody,
yes.
regarding the sewer and the when the house is changing from one owner to another, so the changes have to be done or just the information regarding the compliance?
So Rufina, that depends on your area. The example I gave is not your area. That's not something that you will likely need to be concerned with. However, you need to know the city that you're writing the offer in the county, you need to know what their requirements are. So if in
Okay,
doubt, make sure you're calling the city and the county and finding out.
okay,
Okay,
thank you.
Bob?
Yeah, to add to that, in the city of Ventura, we've got situations like that where an area has been incorporated. What's happened is that if there's a septic system on that particular property and it has failed, the city made it, and this again is just for the city of Ventura, not for everybody out there. But the city made it to where you had to hook up to the city sewers, provided it was within a certain distance to the most or the closest sewer line. Some of the areas they still allow to replace the septic and leach beds, but that's pretty rare anymore. So again, is what Jodi is telling all of you. Make sure you find out from your jurisdiction, from the city that you're representing especially if you're representing a buyer and they're moving into something with a septic, find out exactly what the whole scale of issues may be with that.
Absolutely. Thank you for adding to that. Also something that I'll add that doesn't necessarily have to do with that writing an offer, but when it does come to finding something out about a local legality or a local ordinance, or sometimes people or your buyers will ask you questions about certain things, you can help in finding that information out. However, you must have your client do their due diligence. They are the ones, and it even states, maybe Bob knows offhand what paragraph it's in. I know it's in here. It even states in the purchase agreement, they need to do their due diligence. Because what happens if you call the city or the county and you get given wrong information inadvertently by maybe a new person, and then you pass that on to your client, then you become responsible for that wrong information. But if they call, then the city or whoever they're calling is responsible for that wrong information. So you need to know and you can help, but the best help you can do is guide them to who they need to ask.
I think
Okay.
I speak for all of our brokers with all of the different market centers, and that is that a good example is permits. Sure, you can go and do some research on the permits, but make sure you don't hand those permits over to your client. Have them go and investigate. You can hold their hand while they're doing it, but go have them investigate on permits or anything else that Jodi's bringing up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just a recipe for disaster if you don't have your client do their due diligence, a potential one anyway. Okay, let's move on here. So we have some additional changes in the compensation. They've basically just added some things for timing of broker compensation. Seller or buyer or both, as applicable, agree to pay compensation to broker as specified in a separate written agreement, your BRBC, between broker and that seller or buyer. Compensation is payable upon close of escrow, or if escrow does not close as otherwise specified in the agreement between broker and that seller or buyer. So basically just clarifying compensation. Buyer representation, seller payment to compensation, buyer's broker. Buyer affirmatively represents that buyer at the time this offer is made has a written agreement with buyer's broker that is valid, covers the property, and provides for compensation for no less than the amount stated in paragraph 3G. So in other words, the amount on your representation agreement has to match what you're putting on here. You can put less on here and the buyer can pay the difference, but you cannot put more than what is on your agreement. Excuse me. Down here, third-party beneficiary. Seller acknowledges and agrees that the buyer's broker is a third-party beneficiary of this agreement and may pursue seller for failure to pay the amount specified in this document. Okay. Then they've changed some titles here: escrow instruction paragraphs, general provisions, copies, statements of information, tax withholding instructions. So they're just clarifying this. Broker compensation payment. Basically anything you see in red is where the verbiage has changed. If it's not red, the verbiage has not changed. Okay. This is escrow holder shall provide to buyer a closing statement or other written documentation disclosing the amount of compensation paid to buyer's broker. So that had to be added, of course. Escrow holder shall provide to seller a closing statement or other written documentation closing, 1, the amount of compensation paid to seller's broker, 2, if applicable, pursuant to paragraph 3G, or mutual instruction of the parties. The amount paid by seller for buyer's broker compensation, escrow holder's obligation pursuant to 19D is not intended to alter any pre-existing practice of escrow holder to issue as applicable joint or separate closing statements. Escrow holder's obligation is independent of but may be satisfied by any closing statement mandated by buyer's lender. So that's just clarifying what they need to provide to the buyer and seller with all of our new things going on. Okay. Verification of deposit, delivery of amendments. Nothing's changed in what they say, just how they're titling that. And down here, they have given, I noticed this was on the BRBC too, which I forgot to pull up, but it's the same thing, these match. They're giving you different entity buyers that may be on here. This is, they've actually added quite a bit to this versus just checking a box and writing something in. Basically, if an entity like a company, a trust, corporation, anything like that versus an individual, or also legally authorized signer, the names go here. Okay, and that's the same thing is repeated here. And I think, yep, that is all of the changes. So before we move on to the listing agreement, any questions about any of the changes or anything on the RPA? All righty then. Moving on to the listing agreement. This one, I like these, and again, this one's very simple. There's not a massive amount of changes here. So there's not a lot to go over. Just as on the other one, they've added or see broker created compensation schedule. So you can create a compensation schedule, something other than a percentage or a flat fee. Most people don't do that. However, I do know some who do. Okay. Down here, this has changed. And I think this is a good change. This makes it a lot easier. Publication of seller willingness to consider concessions. So this used to not be on the RLA, and it was on the MLS addendum that was part of the RLA, and it often got forgotten. So if checked below, seller authorizes broker to market that seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions, and no amount of possible concession will be stated in such marketing unless seller notifies broker in writing of the amount. And then you can check that it'll be in the MLS that's listed above on the RLA, if permitted by that MLS, and in any or in any other marketing outside of the MLS. Bob?
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate this whole idea that we're talking about right here, and that is that uh, you don't want to try to do something kind of sneaky to get the word out that your seller's willing to pay compensation unless it is strictly the way that the MLS is set up. There are people out there that are watching us very carefully, and that if you make a little thing in there that there's 3% being paid to the buyer's broker. And if they catch you with that, the fines are severe and there's no warning. So be very careful with how you proceed with that.
Yeah, absolutely. The only my recommendation is you can say that seller is willing to consider a concession based on whatever offer they may receive, right? C.A.R. has not given us any place to put an amount of compensation. It's not on any of the forms. Therefore, we should not ever mention an amount, right? Because it's going to be dependent upon the offer, just like everything else, right? So a seller might tell you they're willing to pay 2%, 3%, whatever to a buyer, but what if the offer comes in crazy low? Now they're not going to want to do that, right? So just don't ever mention amounts and you'll be safe. Okay. This is just adding changes of where these things are explained down below. And I think that was really the main change. Right here, seller concessions, this was added in. So we'll go over this. Whoops, what happened? Okay, everybody still see that? My screen went weird for a second. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go over this real quickly. Concessions are monetary payments that a seller agrees to contribute toward a buyer's expenses and other costs a buyer is responsible for in the transaction. Concessions may include, but are not limited to, cost of escrow or title, lender fees, repairs, inspections, and buyer broker compensation. Concessions specified in the MLS must be allowed to be used for any permissible buyer expense or cost and must not specify the concessions are to be used for broker compensation. Kind of reiterating part of what we were just saying. However, a term in the buyer's offer may specify that the seller agrees to pay all or a portion of the compensation that the buyer owes its broker. Again, it goes in the purchase agreement. Concessions identified in an MLS listing are not promises to pay, but instead indicate to a buyer that the seller will consider offers asking for concessions. Concessions specified in the MLS are not intended to be binding on seller unless included in the accepted purchase agreement. So I think this is great verbiage that was added here. It makes it very clear. And this is also a point that you're going to want to go over at your listing appointments with your sellers, because it's going to make your sellers feel more comfortable about considering concessions, right? Because they're not obligating themselves to anything up front. It will be considered based on whatever offer that they may accept. And we'll do workshops in the future about how to talk to sellers, how to present compensation, all of those things. And we talk a lot about that in our coaching as well. But this is something that's going to help you at your listing appointments, make your sellers comfortable with the conversation. Okay, and obviously they've changed some, because of adding, just so you see, these are all in red and I'm not going over them. It's because they've added this up here. They had to change the numbers of what was here. So those things didn't actually change. Again, this whole entity, legal authority, signers, this is the same as in the other forms right here. So those are the only changes on the listing agreement. I think they're great changes. They're super simple, but it's good that this is up here in the grid now. So any question on any of the changes or anything else about the listing agreement before we move
Yes,
forward?
I have a question.
Hey, Stacy.
Hi, actually, it's for you, Bob. So are we allowed in the Ojai and Ventura MLSs to say that the seller will consider concessions?
I do believe there's a field in there that states that they will consider concessions, but that's it. You cannot specify how much.
Understood. It just was very clear that you could only do it if your MLS allowed it. So I need to make sure our MLSs do allow it.
I'm not certain on the Ojai, but I do know the Ventura one does. The C.A.R. MLS does.
Okay.
And Stacy, from what I'm seeing in different MLSs, because we're in multiple market centers, if an MLS allows it, there's typically a field that it's just yes or no.
Okay,
It's not-
great.
you're not typing in there seller will consider concessions. If you don't
Okay.
see a yes or no field, don't mention it.
Perfect. Thank you.
It is best rule of thumb, unless you check with your MLS specifically and they tell you differently.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I got a question real quick. So specific, now that's MLS, but what can we do in our marketing? Is it still,
Again,
you stay the same way?
no mention of any compensation whatsoever. You can say the
They
seller
consider,
is willing to consider concessions,
okay,
okay, which could include closing costs, buyer's agent's compensation, right? But you don't say an amount.
mhm,
Okay,
right,
and we've had I've been a part of several things with Gov Hutchinson as he's given updates and things, and he very specifically said, do not say an amount. There's a reason there's no C.A.R form available that lets you put an amount, and that translates to anything outside of that.
yeah, well,
So,
that, I mean, it's the way it works out is it helps you out by not saying an amount. Because, you know, like when an agent calls you, hey, what are you guys considering? It's just like, I don't know, what'd you put on your BRBC? You know, submit it and we'll let you know. Just,
yeah, submit your offer, and if the offer is strong enough, my seller is willing to consider. Okay. And have conversations with your sellers, guys. Explain to them why it is in their best interest to consider concessions, right? When you're doing your listing appointments, you should be taking net sheets that include worst case scenario, the highest compensation they'll likely be asked for, right? Because when you give a worst case scenario and and you're still netting them more than they hope to get, that takes away a lot of the objections when it comes to paying those concessions. So a lot of it starts at the listing appointment and how you set that up and the expectations that you set. Okay. All right, so those are our main ones. Let's go to, I'm only going to go over one of the counter offers because I believe they all change the same. So I'm going to pull up the seller counter offer here and make it a little bit bigger so we can see it. Oops, I made it too big. Now it's not fitting. There we go. Okay. Okay, so not a lot has changed on here, but when it comes down here, in number 4 offer, it says this counter offer is valid regardless of whether any previous offer or counter offer expired by its terms. So essentially what I believe this to mean, and Bob, you can correct me if you have a different belief here, just like a offer is not automatically void because the 3 days or whatever was written in is up, it's voidable, not void. That's what the same thing with the counter offer. So if it's for 3 days and it takes 4 days for them to get back to you and everybody's still agreeable to move forward, everybody can move forward. It doesn't automatically void just because the time's up. It becomes voidable, not void.
Can I add a little bit to that? I've always tried, not only in my own business, but whenever an agent would request a conversation about this, is that even though you may still be in negotiations and the one had quote unquote expired, it may be best to at least, I'm sorry, my phone's beeping at me here. It may be best to at least make a mention in any additional counteroffer that you are extending the expiration date of the previous counteroffer, just so you don't get anybody to say, well, wait a minute, that expired, and now we've got this other offer that's far better. We want to go with that instead, when in reality you were still in negotiations. So just be a little careful on how you word it.
That's good advice there. This paragraph 6 here also kind of helps clarify late acceptance. If the date of buyer's signature in paragraph 5 is after the expiration specified in 2A, buyer's acceptance is only binding if seller agrees to the late acceptance by signing below before 5 p.m. on the third day after the date the seller counteroffer is signed. So what Bob said is great advice. And again, it becomes voidable, not void, just like our purchase agreement. We don't have to start from scratch just because we missed the deadline. There could be very valid reasons why those deadlines get missed. And part of that too, have conversations with your clients. If an offer is being made or a counter offer is made and you know the party receiving it is out of town for a couple of days or can't be reached or whatever the case may be, communicate that to the other side. You know, this is a business of relationships, not just with our clients, but also with our fellow realtors who we want to have good relationships with. So communication is the key in everything, and communication will help things go smoothly. Okay, so that is really the only change in the counter offers, and that is for all the counter offers have had that verbiage added to them, whether it's a buyer, seller, or multiple. Cindy?
How many days do you think you should wait for the seller counter offer to come back?
Well, that's going to be a case by case scenario, right? The forms default to 3 days.
Correct.
Some people will write in a date sooner. Some people will put in a date later, knowing there's a situation. I don't recommend putting in a sooner date and pushing somebody unless there's a very valid reason for it and it's been communicated, because that could actually turn the tables around and go against you more than help you. A lot of people think, oh, if they have to respond within 24 hours, they can't respond to all these other offers. And actually, they may just kick that one out so that they can focus on all the other offers, right? So really communicate. It's all about communication and what is the situation? Why is it late?
Okay, okay. All right.
Yeah, it's going to be case by case.
Can I step in here real quick, Cindy?
Of course.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm going to make this very open to everybody. Cindy actually ran into a really difficult listing agent, as well as the sellers themselves were very hard to get a hold of. And because of all the communication that she was able to do, which is vital, I think, in our industry, if you want to keep a deal together, she was able to just keep in contact with everybody, and fortunately was able to get it closed finally. But there were, I think all of us, with Vivaldi Holdings and everybody that is affiliated with KW here, is that stay very active with the other agent, regardless whether they are communicating with you or not. Cindy actually had to bring the other broker involved to be able to get this thing put together. And fortunately, they came through and were able to at least help us out and get it done. But communication is key, and Cindy had everything documented. So if you're going by verbal on the phone, definitely write everything down. If you've got text messages, if you've got emails, save them. And that, even if it's a really easy transaction, save them because you may need them.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. And that's a different scenario, right? So when I was talking, Cindy, answering your question, I'm assuming people are communicating, right? So I guess we don't assume everything. But when you have somebody not communicating, that only goes so far, and then getting the other broker involved. And Bob, would you recommend, though, before you get another broker involved, to do a notice to perform?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind, we're all independent contractors. The broker is there as I don't want to say a last effort or a last, part of resolve on this, but they, definitely do the steps that are afforded you with all of the different forms. You don't want to, pardon the expression, you don't want to piss the other side off. There may be a
Right.
very valid reason on the other end, illness, someone was in a car accident, whatever it may be. So you have to have some patience on that. And then, of course, you got to convey that to your client. But, do your best to utilize the forms you've got. And then if you get into a sticking point, that's when you bring your broker in. Car legal is wonderful. You can use that whenever you need to. Jodi knows everything, so call her up.
Not everything.
And we can go from there. So, okay.
Just enough to be dangerous. Dindy.
I did have seller to perform twice.
Yeah. And that's you're probably talking about as you get into the transaction. When it comes to, offers and counter offers and those kinds of things. And we have had agents where the other side just won't communicate. And it's very frustrating. And all you can do is be that buffer for your client and communicate at how often you are reaching out to the other side, and that you're at the mercy of waiting to hear from them. But just because the other side isn't communicating with you doesn't give you the freedom to not communicate with your client. They still need to know that you are working hard for them. So regardless of what's happening with the other side, you must communicate. That's so important. Communication is vital to every relationship in life, right? So can't express it. You can't over communicate. There's almost no client that's going to tell you, will you stop updating me? So, I mean, there might be one or two, but that's very doubtful. Okay. So we have two modifications. There's been some changes to the modification of terms. So let's go over the one for the buyer representation agreement. And let's see, here we go. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So buyer representation agreement. And this is for the BRBC or the PSRA, and then you can check a box if it's for something else. Okay. So it automatically defaults to either BRBC or PSRA. You don't have to check a separate box for PSRA. Expiration date. So the expiration of the representation agreement, because now it isn't just the BRBC, is changed to. So basically that's what they are, the change that was made on here, because I believe that you used to have to check a box if it was the PSRA. Now it's either one of these is included in buyer representation agreement verbiage. And that is the main change that was made on here. Modification to the compensation shall only apply to the following properties. I do appreciate this addition because we've actually had people write in, because if you are doing a purchase agreement and say your representation agreement, for sake of argument, has 3% on it, but you've agreed to 2.5% on a purchase agreement, but you haven't agreed to 2.5% if this one falls out, right? And so this allows you to modify that agreement to the lower amount is only for that particular property. So I think that's a really good modification. Property type, if you're changing that, location, if you're changing that, and you'll notice your BRBC has cities and counties. Do counties, guys. Okay, because otherwise, for instance, where I live in Visalia. It would be common for people to look in Visalia or Tulare, but then a property could come up in Exeter or Hanford. These are surrounding cities in my area that they want to look at. I don't want to do a modification for that, so I would put Tulare and Kings counties. in Ventura, you guys should probably have Ventura and Los Angeles. Some of your properties are right on the border. Oak Park is an example of that. So and Los Angeles and Orange, put counties because then that covers a larger area and you don't have to worry about them wanting to change their mind to do something else. If it's changing from a non-exclusive to an exclusive, so now they have that on here, check that box. And then they've just changed, instead of saying buyer, they're saying principal. Okay. Any questions on the modification?
So
Pretty
you're
simple.
just writing in like so the amount of compensation is changed as follows through 2.5% or 3% to 2.5%.
Yeah, well, whatever change is happening.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
so you're just writing it in.
Yeah.
Got
Now
it.
remember, with these, your compensation should, if you're modifying it, it should be going down, not up, right?
Correct.
Because we want to make sure that fair housing practices are being followed here. So your compensation is what it is on your buyer representation agreement, and you're not going to do a bunch of modifications to up and down depending on what somebody has agreed on. So that's why this addition is great, because you can leave your BRBC at your original compensation, and then if you have a property where you've agreed to take less, you check this box, you put the amount less and the property address. Then if it falls out of escrow for some reason, your buyer's still obligated to the original compensation on the BRBC for anything else. Make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. There was a modification for the listing agreement, and really, I'll show it to you, but this isn't really probably even worth talking about. All they've done is changed buyer to principal. Okay. Listing agreement, or if it's a different form. So they've really just added principal in here instead of, or seller rather, in this case. So instead of buyer, seller on these forms, they're saying principal. Who is your buyer and seller? Okay. Now I did notice we have a few more minutes here, so I'm going to pull up the TDS. I noticed it was in the red line section, and okay, there's nothing significant on here. I'll show you what it is. It's really only in the initials here, and at the bottom, they've made some changes to how they've had this formatted. But there's no changes to the actual form itself, just how they're formatting the signatures. Okay, just in case somebody's used to doing something, it's good to know that. And then the same thing, there's a change on the SPQ that I will show you. You make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Excuse me. Okay, so no real changes except for here. They've added disaster relief insurance or civil settlement. Are you seller aware of? And they've added B. Receiving domestic water storage tank assistance pursuant to the water code, or whether the real property ever received such assistance and the real property currently still has the domestic storage tank. We won't read all of this because this isn't going to apply to a lot of properties, but make sure that you do read this and understand it. And again, is seller aware, yes or no? And then that's the only change that was made to this. So this is, for some areas, this is needed to be addressed. One of the things that I will remind everyone with the SPQ and the TDS, those are your seller's disclosures to the buyer. You may not fill those out or help them fill them out. The only help that you can give them is to reiterate that the forms say, are you seller aware? If they're aware, the answer is yes. If they're not aware, the answer is no. And then you do need to tell them that they need to disclose everything that they are aware of. And so sometimes, well, they wanted to know if they had to disclose this. Yes. Right? If it's something that they know and they're asking you if they need to disclose it, the answer is yes. You can't over disclose. Okay. So just be aware of that. Those are the main changes. There were other changes to other forms, not forms that we use on a daily basis, so I didn't make those part of today. If you ever have questions on any of our forms, feel free to reach out to me, to your local broker, and we'll all be happy to help you with any of that. And those of you that are in the productivity coaching program, make sure you utilize our daily Ask a Coach hour. And send us your forms to look at before you have your client sign them, just to make sure everything is done properly, especially if it'll be your first or second transaction. So before we have 7 minutes left, does anyone have any other questions?
Hi, I just wanted to introduce myself. Happy New Year, everyone. My name is Candace, and I just onboarded with the Hollywood Hills location, and just wanted to say hello and Happy New Year.
Oh, well, welcome, Candace. Thank you. We're happy to have you with us.
Thanks,
All
guys.
right. Well, I hope everyone is set up to
Oh.
thrive in 2020. Lisa, did you have something?
Yes, I did. In the chat, I had asked if we were gonna get a copy of the red line documents that you went over. I was hoping to have a copy.
Those are located at CAR.org.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You can, and there you'll get a list of all of them. If there's any form you may need that we didn't cover today.
Jody, so do we wait for these videos? Because I really need to go through hearing you, going to the document, and then I know it's in CRMLS or CAR, but the explanation that you're giving is key. So I will wait for your video also.
Okay. Yes, we'll post that in our WhatsApp group on our Facebook page when we have it up. And it's on, they always go on the YouTube page for Jodi Jolly Coaching and Consulting. Okay, and they take a few days to get up. My husband does those after hours since he has a full-time job. So I hope everyone is set up to thrive in 2025. Don't forget, guys, these are your 5 big rocks, right? If you want to even be able to use one of the forms we talked about today, you got to have clients. That means you got to lead generate. It means you got to follow up with those leads. You got to set and go on appointments with those leads. Then you get the privilege of writing and negotiating the contracts that we went over today. And to do all of those things at a high level, you must practice your conversations. We will be having workshops on specific conversations as we move along. If anyone has something specific they'd like to see in one of our workshops this year, please reach out to me and let me know, and we'll be happy to incorporate it. Okay? Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. And Bob, thanks for joining us. Please come anytime.
That was my pleasure. I enjoyed it. So good job, Jodi.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.